Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. My name's Mimi Coulter. I am the newly appointed Vice Provost and University Librarian here at Washington University. And I want to really warmly welcome all of you who are joining us today, whether you're able to be here with us in beautiful Graham Chapel or are part of the group that is joining us online. This Joy Williams event is a really special one, and I'm glad that so many of you are able to be here and to be a part of it. In the 4 short weeks that I've been in the role of University Librarian, I've spent a lot of my time getting to know the libraries. And one thing that has really helped me as I've gotten to know the libraries is spending time in our exhibit spaces. It's just been a good way to orient myself, but really also to learn about our unique and exciting research collections. And so based on that experience, I very much encourage you, if you have not already, to visit the Ginkgo room on the first floor of Olin Library, right behind us, and to explore the exhibit Joy Williams, Honored Guest. There's a digital version of this exhibit as well for those of you who are not on campus, which is also excellent. And they are not identical, so don't feel like you should limit yourself to one. Please partake of both. They work together quite well. And they're both great ways to get to know this really rich literary resource, which is only available here at Washington University. So one reason that the event today is special is the acquisition of the Joy Williams papers in 2017 was really a milestone for the WashU libraries, also, and for its modern literature collection. Also for the English department, who directly supported the acquisition, and really for the university as a whole. The acquisition solidified an already strong association between a top-notch writing program and a revered writer and instructor. From the library's perspective, it's brought our first archival collection from a female author who exclusively writes prose. We're very happy to have that. And since the collection opened for research in 2018, numerous creative writing classes have visited to explore it. Scholars and fans of Joy from across the country have come to use the materials, and we really look forward to having many more. So not only did the English department support the acquisition, but their ongoing support has helped bring Joy Williams here today to read to us from her new novel, Harrow. I understand this is going to be the only reading that Joy will be doing this fall to promote Harrow, and it's really our great honor to provide her the means to be able to do that. Left Bank Books has also been really helpful in this effort, so thanks to them as well. So, in closing, I just want to note that today's program is part of Washington University's Assembly Series. Since 1953, the Assembly Series has presented more than 1,000 of the most important voices of our time, including Eleanor Roosevelt, Toni Morrison, Ralph Ellison, Spike Lee, Francis Crick, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. The programs are always free and are open to the public. And soon, all of the lectures are going to be digitized and made freely accessible to patrons thanks to a grant from the Council on Library and Information Resources. I'm really excited for us to be a part of that effort. So with that, I'm going to invite our curator for the curator of the Modern Literature Collection, Joel Miner, to take the stage and to introduce Joy Williams and David Shuman. Thanks, and please enjoy the program.
Thank you, Mimi, and thank you, everybody, for coming today. I want to thank all the people who have made this event possible, the exhibition possible. It's really too many to name here tonight, but it couldn't have happened without their efforts, especially under somewhat trying planning circumstances this semester. I'm so happy that Joy can be here today for this exclusive reading and conversation with David Shuman. We will also leave time for Q&A after the conversation. So please, if you think of any questions, come up at that time and ask them, because this is a rare opportunity to ask Joy Williams a question. Dave Shuman is the perfect person to talk to Joy about her writing, her archive, her teaching career, and her association with Washington University. Having been her student, a regular teacher of her work, and someone who was, with his fiction colleagues, was instrumental in helping us secure the archive. Dave earned his MFA in fiction from WashU in 2002, and he took a class with Joy when she was a visiting professor that year. He has been the director of the MFA program for 8 years, and coordinates the creative writing concentration for undergraduate English majors. His fiction, his nonfiction, and reviews have appeared in numerous publications, including Conjunctions and Black Warrior Review. His work has been the recipient of the Pushcart Prize and has been listed as notable in both the Best American Short Stories and the Best American Essays. He was recently awarded a McDowell Fellowship, and his prose chapbook, Best Men, was just published by Tammy Press. So fans of Joy Williams may have heard of a list that she devised, the 9 essential attributes of the short story. If you aren't familiar with the list, or even if you are, check out the video on the Library of Congress website on the occasion of them awarding her the 2021 Prize for American Fiction. Joy and Robert Casper discuss the list, as well as her remarkable new novel, Harrow, and her writing in general. In our exhibition, Joy Williams' Honored Guest, we have a draft of this list from 2015, in which she describes them as 8 attributes and one way a short story differs from the novel. Whatever the number and title, such a list by such a master of the short story is certainly one for the literary ages. If she ever makes it to an even 10, I say we chisel them in tablets and call them commandments. But as much as I revere Joy as a reader and cherish her as a friend, I want to give this introduction as a curator who feels the greatest privilege to care for her literary papers and who wants to invite others to discover their own joy, pun intended, in them. With that in mind, here now are my 9 essential attributes of the literary archive, using the Joy Williams papers as inspiration. And of course, you can see examples of all of these in the exhibition. 1, personal and professional photographs of the writer from throughout her life that capture her individuality and her personality. 2, endearing juvenilia and other early writings that give us hints of the magnitude to come. 3, paper drafts of favorite published pieces that show the author's mistakes, inspirations, and creative ways of editing. And Joy's papers have these in spades. 4, unpublished work to spark some what if and why not curiosity. 5, editorial matter that reveals the efforts of the editors, agents, fellow writers, proofreaders, and graphic designers that result in the books that we know and love. 6, all sorts of published materials, including magazines, broadsides, chapbooks, and journals, often hard to find and differing from later versions of the work they contain. 7, personal correspondence from other writers for invaluable insight into both the senders and the recipients' activities, their relationships, and their creative work. Again, lots and lots of this attribute in her papers. 8, materials such as ephemera, notes, memorabilia, and more from the writer's professional life, the awards she has won, the readings and workshops she has given, and other public engagements. And 9, there is the expectation of future acquisitions of additional attributes, such as the author's personal writing journals. And whenever you're ready to let go of any of those, Joy, you have my number. It's hard to stop at 9, but I know you are, like me, are ready to hear from the author herself. So please join me in welcoming our honored guest, Joy Williams.
For the first time, I'm actually concerned that you have my archive. And I mean, I never thought this through, I don't think. But I do have some, I do keep lots of notebooks, not so much for jotting down portions of stories I want to write, but just random thoughts. But I haven't given those to Joel yet. He told me he'd give them back, but I didn't believe him. So I still have those, but I'll give them to him sometime. Whoops. I borrowed his phone so I wouldn't go on too long reading, but I already messed it up. I am really technologically. Start. See? 4 minutes. Okay. I haven't read from Harrow before. This is my first reading. And I was looking through it this morning, and it's rather difficult to excerpt. And I was telling David that normally I read short stories, and you don't have to be like a poet to explain what's coming next. You begin, you end. It's a story. And so, but here with Harrow, I have to give a little introduction. But I'm going to read a small section that's been mentioned in some of the reviews of Harrow. It takes place at a bowling alley at a birthday party for a 10-year-old boy, Jeffrey, who longs to be a judge. He's 10 years old. He comes from a family of jurists. Can you hear me all right? Is there a big echo? Okay. And so his mother has planned, they have fallen in very weird times when 1/3 of the world is gone, in this place outside an establishment called the Institute, where a group of elderly eco-warriors are planning to stop the recovery movement after this apocalypse. But so there's Jeffrey, his mother Barbara, and Barbara has a terrible thing to tell him, but she is determined to tell him this on his birthday, that his father has killed his grandfather. And that's why they're sort of fleeing. He adored his grandfather. He is totally unaware of this. And Lola, the matriarch of the Institute, thinks this is a terrible idea to tell him this at a birthday party at a bowling alley. But this is the situation. Jeffrey's birthday party was to take place at a bowling alley. When Kristen expressed surprise that amusements such as bowling alleys still existed, Lola said it was akin to the survival of light bulbs lying intact on a rocky shore. Plus, there was a little buffer zone around them here at the Institute where matters appeared to transpire in their customary nasty way via establishments of entertainment, mostly. Thus, Paradise Lanes flourished with its proud leagues, its rules and captains and hierarchical clubs. It was even expanding under new ownership to host children's birthday parties, which was highly controversial. I advised Barbara against going there, but she said she was told that they provide balloons, pizza slices, and cold drinks for the children, as well as a mystery gift for the birthday child, Lola said. All she has to pay for is the cake, the lanes, and the adults' incidentals. It's the bowling leagues that's my concern. I know these people. That's a sacred place to them. And Tuesday night, their sacred hour. The new owner has no idea how seriously they take their traditions. They could make us feel most unwelcome. I foresee possible unpleasantness on a considerable scale, particularly if in the middle of it, Barbara tells the boy that his father murdered his grandfather, which I think is her intention. They were a close-knit family until they unraveled. It happened at luncheon when little Jeffrey was at the dentist having his teeth cleaned. The men were arguing some legal technicality, and it got out of hand. Mother and child have been fugitives from that fraught occurrence ever since. Does anybody know how to bowl? Kristen asked. Kristen sat him back with Jeffrey. He would be 10 years old at 7 o'clock that night. He held a boxed cake on his lap and stared through the cracked windshield of Lola's old car while maintaining a soft and running commentary with himself. Now, similarly, unlike objection, the point is well taken up to a point. May we justifiably harm one innocent in order to save the many? Objection. By the mutual agreement of parties concerned, all parties concerned, objection. What does it feel like to be almost 10, Jeffrey? Lola asked. What? Jeffrey said. You're such a skinny little fellow. You must eat like a gerbil. I don't know what a gerbil eats. Oh, let's see. A gerbil eats ground nuts, beans, flaxseed oil, maybe, tea. If that's what my mother fed me, she could be charged with assault, reckless endangerment, and endangering the welfare of a child, Jeffrey said. You want to come up front and shift when I make my turn up here, Lola inquired. You push down, then over and down. As I depress the clutch, you want to shift? No, I don't, Jeffrey said. Excuse me. He resumed his discouraging sing-song. If the statute is content-based, strict scrutiny applies. Arbitrary and capricious. It is a well-established principle of statutory interpretation that the law favors rational and sensible construction. They pulled into the parking lot of Paradise Lanes and parked between a panel truck that had "Good News Exterminating" painted on the door, and a sedan displaying a "former fetus driving" sticker on the bumper. Frank Lloyd Wright designed this bowling alley, Lola informed them. Surely not, Barbara protested. It was the first time she had spoken all evening. The blueprint suffered considerable compromises, though, Lola said. The bowlers were locked in long and bitter conflict among themselves. Some of them had strokes. I'm sure that Frank Lloyd Wright would not for one moment have expended his talents on designing a bowling alley. In the beginning, it was supposed to be on stilts, Lola said. Get out of the car, Jeffrey, Barbara said, breaking off this hopeless discussion. Let's get this birthday over with. Don't look at that cake yet. He was dressed in a meticulous fashion, tasseled loafers, khaki pants, a white shirt, and a seersucker jacket. I hope she doesn't let that cake do the talking for her, Lola said quietly to Kristen, like she'd recreate the murder scene in Frosting and let him deduce the worst. They followed mother and child into the building. The light inside was golden, and the sound of falling pins relentless. The bowlers, men and women both, were of that pastime's typical bent, hefty, of a tribal disposition, and with themselves well pleased. After they released the ball, they held the afterword of their poses for a vanity of time. I want tickets for 4, demanded Barbara, the concessionaire. A gutter block, a pitcher of martinis, and a couple of chocolate milks. Forget the pizza and balloons. Is this the extent of the party? That's right, Barbara said. They were directed to the last lane, near the toilets, and seated at a small table there. Bowling's sort of like archery, Lola said to Jeffrey. You want to hit the mark. Archery, Barbara cried. It couldn't be less like archery. Shelley's case, Jeffrey said worriedly. I don't understand the definition of the rule in Shelley's case, one of the first and most relevant cases in common law. His mother looked at him disapprovingly. Nobody has the capacity to understand the rule in Shelley's case. That's right, the child said after a moment, clearly relieved. Precedent, principle, and policy. Everything depends upon the choice made from a large number of possible broader propositions. Before he discovered the verbal wiles of the law, he had to use an inhaler, Barbara said to Lola. Do you know what civil death is, Jeffrey? Lola asked. The deprivation of civil rights as a result of being declared an outlaw, little Jeffrey said happily. The kid cannot be stumped. Nothing stumps him, Barbara said. The beverages arrived, as well as the mystery gift, which proved to be a paper bag containing a buzzer ring, a plastic fly, and a plastic ice cube, and a splash of authentic-looking vomit, also plastic. Well, would you look at that, Jeffrey, Lola said. Some care went into this selection for a little boy. I don't want to bowl, Mother, Jeffrey said. Of course not. Of course you don't. It's out of the question. Potential autonomy is insufficient to prove, Jeffrey crooned softly. Objection, hypothetical, and speculative. You're going to be a great barrister, Barbara said, savoring the last of the pitcher of martinis. Nothing will prevent it from happening, neither the loss of our fortune nor the dignity of our family name. Hey, lane 15, a woman yelled. You gonna bowl? People come here to bowl. Show some respect. She and her group wore bright orange sateen jackets with Good News Exterminating whirling in thick red thread upon the back. We need plates and forks, Barbara said. I'll get them. But when she returned, she bore only another pitcher of martinis. Do you ever, Lola asked after a few cocktails, see everything as being tiny? Everything exceptionally tiny? Lilliputian, even? No, Barbara said. You're almost afraid to touch anything for fear you'll crush it without meaning to? No, because that's characteristic of raging alcoholism. Having a drink in a tiny house with tiny things scattered about would be quite disturbing, Barbara conceded. Could we cut the cake now, Jeffrey asked. Kristen was surprised he directed the question to her. She could not recall a single birthday, not one. The words hung recklessly in the air. Yes, Barbara said, it's time. Happy birthday, darling. I may not have handled everything as well as I could have. With her long fingernails, Barbara slit the tape that secured the flaps of the box, closed her eyes, and shoved back the lid. A disturbing scene was disclosed, executed in frosting. Daddy's dead, Jeffrey said. Barbara's eyes flipped open. I knew the baker wouldn't do this right. What a goddamn backwater this place is. I described the situation as I had witnessed it in the same way I described it to the police, who complimented me at the time on my lucidity and calm. I had certainly made their work easier, they told me. And the baker assured me he grasped the situation. He had been in the armed forces, he told me, and had seen mayhem. He had seen the results of disagreement. He was also sensitive to the subtleties of disclosure, he told me, and yet, look at this. He reversed everything. He mixed everything up. I was wondering where you located a baker, Lola said. Who was I speaking to if not a baker? Barbara demanded. Daddy's not dead, Jeffrey said. Your goddamn father is alive, but he's in big trouble this time. You never liked Daddy, Jeffrey mused. You should have obtained a divorce years ago, before I was born even. Could it be someone else's cake order? Kristen suggested, although this seemed unlikely. It's not very nice, is it? Maybe it tastes better than it looks. Most people around here bake their own cakes when the fancy strikes them, which isn't often, Lola persisted. Is it me who's dead? Jeffrey asked. Don't be willfully dense, darling. Give Mother a bit of a break here. I'm merely curious. Don't be, his mother snapped. It's a characteristic worthless in a lawyer. She pitched the false fly and the false ice cube into the empty pitcher. What I really wanted for my birthday was a mock-up of a jury box in my bedroom, Jeffrey confided to Kristen. Perhaps it will be there upon our return. Who would be in the jury box? Kristen asked. I have very few friends. I suppose there wouldn't be anyone there. You, lane 15, the woman bawled. That damn baker just copied Saturno on the cake, Barbara complained. Can't miss that, Lola agreed. To Kristen, she said, a very famous and disturbing painting by the Spaniard Goya. I can see why the baker might consider it, but in the case of little Jeffrey here and his father and grandfather, the situation is the opposite. You, loiterers, the woman called. No loitering here. One more minute, and I'm going to take her personalized bowling ball and cram it down her throat, Barbara said. She looked alarmingly bright-eyed. Jeffrey was studying the cake. The background frosting was blue and looked thoroughly toxic. He did not wear glasses, but if recalled by others, he was a frail little boy in large, smudged glasses. The painting is actually called Saturn, devouring his son, Lola whispered to Kristen, although it could just as well be his daughter. Kristen nodded. It was a helpless, naked human figure. Gender played no part. The important thing to realize, is that Saturn, whenever and however depicted, represents time, which with its ravenous appetite for life devours all its creations, whether they are beings, things, ideas, or sentiments, Lola said. How remarkable it was, Kristen thought, to be able to discourse on fine art in a bowling alley where you were not welcome. Whoever made this cake did a pretty good job considering the crudity of the decorating caps available now for affixing to the frosting tubes, Lola continued. Of course, we never will know who it was made this cake. It's 7 o'clock, darling, Barbara said to Jeffrey. You've just left the first decade of your life behind. You're a little man now. I'm not. I'm a minor. I have years before I'm sweet Joris. Surely you know that, Mother. A threshold has been passed, Barbara insisted. A muscular fellow in a tight T-shirt was approaching them. Perhaps we should leave, murmured Lola. The shirt had a question imprinted upon it. Got sand? He stood before them, shaking his head. What, is he mute? Barbara asked. You about through here? The man inquired. We got people requesting this lane. This is the desirable lane. What does that mean? Jeffrey asked. It means there's people want to bowl where you're not bowling. I'm referring to your shirt, got sand. What does that mean? It means he's a laborer, Jeffrey, Barbara said, stifling a hiccup. All these people here are probably laborers of some sort, working with their hands, leveling and paving or some such goddamn backwater thing. Sand means grit, courage, backbone, the man said, enraged. Fools, it means cojones. Cojones, Barbara exclaimed. Oh, please, she belched. Jeffrey began. The man's annoyed gaze fell on the grimly colorful cake in its snowy box. God in heaven, he said, stepping back. Jeffrey, honey, we are going to help your mother up. She needs some assistance. Kristen, dear, you bring that cake. We're leaving right now, mister. Kristen rather expected the night to be pleasant after the atmosphere of the bowling alley, but there was a seared, sad smell to it, a smell she had familiarized herself with, she guessed, but was still capable of forgetting. Barbara clung to the door handle of Lola's car. Yes, you're a little man now, Jeffrey. I should tell you about the night you were born sometime. It shall be unlawful for any person to promote, advertise, stage, hold, manage, conduct, participate in, engage in, or carry on. Jeffrey recited sternly. What? Oh, no, Mother, thank you. You need not. You were so small and precious, I was afraid to touch you. All your little bones, and hair. You had so much hair. I never wanted another one after you, that's for sure. I would never, never, never go through something like that again. Mother, I've got a long birth canal. My birth canal's too long. It was such hell, I barely survived. Mother, yes, darling, would it be permissible to throw away the cake? The cake, certainly, hard cake, no help at all. Perhaps the animals in the wood might eat it, Jeffrey said. There aren't any animals in these woods, Lola said, not even those chimps who were brought to be saved. Our native sons have pretty much shot everything out. There was a chimp retreat a few miles from here not that long ago, one of those chimp retirement homes for those who so faithfully served in space shots and non-mutilating experiments and such. The idea was that these aged chimps would have their own fenced-in retreat of a few hundred acres, and caring people would provide them with dog kibble and fresh water daily, and the chimps would spend their final days climbing trees and drawing pictures in the dirt with sticks and eating apricots. It had the potential of becoming a tourist attraction, one of those offbeat ones some people are keen to discover. Those chimps would gaze at you with such cold resentment, no empathy at all, no gratitude either, and a lot of folks got quite a kick out of that. But some good old boys snuck in one Saturday night and picked off those chimps one by one like they were squirrels, shot them right out of the trees they were living in. They even shot Betty. She was the one used to bathe her baby dolls in the washtub. This must be the past, Kristen thought. That would be punishable by, Jeffrey began, but then fell silent. Before the eyes can see, they must be incapable of tears, Kristen said. I've heard that too, and I certainly aspire to it, Lola said. But when I heard they murdered Betty, I just bawled. Thank you. Thank you so much. I don't want to read too long. I have a fear of reading too long. Okay. So I think it's been about 20 minutes. I think I'll read a few little things of my new project. It's about Azrael, who is the being that carries souls after their death to wherever he carries them. It's going to be like 99 Stories of God. They're going to be 99 short little episodes. And again, the idea sort of comes from Thomas Bernhard and his book, Correction. where the cone, the concept of the cone figures very greatly. And Bernhard says in that book, everything is ultimately the cone. So this is called the Cone of Azrael. And Azrael doesn't have many friends, but he is rather a friend of the devil. And so some of these little sections are with his interactions with the devil. Oh, and the title of these pieces always comes at the end of the story. Tell me, the devil said, what is the very worst thing that has happened to you? Why? Azrael said. Then he parried, what is the very worst thing that has ever happened to you? He was aware this was not clever, but he knew the devil only wanted to talk about himself anyway. The fall, of course, my defining moment. He added, it's been depicted many times. Of all the paintings, drawings, and such, my favorite is Gustave Doré. It shows me mid-careen as I descend to earth. Paul Gustave Louis Christopher Doré. He chose to be known as Gustave. I've never understood it. So much to understand, Azrael said. Then he said, the name means glorious guest. It's a rather popular name. Fine artist, the devil said. Dramatic, excellent command of the line. I've seen that portrait of you, Azrael said. You have it framed. To my knowledge, I have never invited you into my chambers, the devil said loftily. He'd always been vain. He'd been told it was one of his biggest problems. And the title for that is His Favorite Picture. And Azrael as a being has got 1,000 wings and 4,000 eyes. Oh, he's pretty impressive. And sometimes with the I don't know if I'm going to persist on this. I haven't done too much of this, but sometimes the title is a line from another writer or artist, and that has its own little asterisk. And here's an example of this. The number of souls are fixed. Each birth is not the creation of a soul, but the completion of the transmigration from one body to another. There is no such thing as a new soul. The souls made no sound as Azrael transported them. Never had one attempted to engage him in thought. The journey was made in perfect silence. They seemed wonderstruck. And the title for this is, I was glad to be held, whether dead or unborn. I did not care. And that's from Ted Hughes, the poet Ted Hughes. Jung dreamt a great deal about the dead, the land of the dead, and the rising of the dead. As a schoolboy, he developed an embarrassing tendency to faint when pressured or when he was being teased. In the winter of 1925, when he was around 50, he visited the American West. The anthropologist, linguist, and hipster Jaime de Angelo told him to meet him at the Grand Canyon, and from there they traveled to Taos, New Mexico. Also in the touring party was Fowler McCormick, son of Cyrus, the reaping machine inventor, and grandson of John D. Rockefeller. There in the Pueblo, Jung was introduced to a man described as a Hopi elder, whose anglicized name was somewhat erroneously translated as Mountain Lake. The two sat on one of the roofs of the Pueblo and watched the sun move across the sky. It was January and must have been very cold. By all accounts, Jung had had a marvelous time, though he learned little about Indian spiritual life. Never before had I run into such an atmosphere of secrecy, he noted, while lamenting that the religions of civilized nations today are all accessible. Their sacraments have long ago ceased to be mysteries. He longed to be introduced to something new. After his visit, he attempted to correspond with Mountain Lake. Any information you can give me about your religious life is always welcome, he wrote. and that's just called Carl. Most of Azrael's eyes were a brownish black, but some were blue and others yellow. Their pupils were heart-shaped, crescent slits, cones pulsed behind them. All of them could rest while open and watch while shut, and they saw everything that moved, or was about to move, or had ceased to move. Azrael remembered when the first one appeared on his body. It was near his nipple. It became his nipple. It gazed at him, and neither was afraid. Azrael then was a mere calf, kit, spiderling, lamb. What was there to fear? It's called nipple. When Azrael was an infant, his sire would sing Ghost Riders in the Sky to him at bedtime. His sire had a beautiful singing voice, and Azrael could thrillingly picture the devil's cattle with red and blazing eyes and hooves of steel stampeding across the heavens, with the weary cowboys damned to pursue them for all eternity. These were cowboys who had lived an unholy life and had never changed their ways when they'd been given multiple opportunities to do so. Azrael summoned up his courage and asked the devil once if his stupendous and tireless herd were entirely red, as he had always imagined. And what did yippee-i-o, yippee-i-a mean anyway? But the devil was in one of his moods and just ignored him. That's the devil's herd. He's going to read. I'm kind of fond of this one. I'll stop. Maybe one more. In the beginning, he wanted to write poetry because he had fallen in love with words. What the words stood for was of secondary importance. I tumbled for words at once, he said. His poems can be enjoyed without understanding them in the slightest. His later work tended to be a bit showy, however. He adored drinking. His wife, Caitlin, adored drinking as well, and once remarked the bar was their altar. Sometimes he would get the shakes, or what he called the horrors, when abstractions, triangles, squares, circles, and cones would descend upon him. Early in the night that he fell into a coma, he claimed that he had drunk 18 whiskeys at his favorite New York tavern, but the bartender said this was an exaggeration, and he had only drunk 8. The cause of his death at 39 was acute alcoholic encephalopathy, with pneumonia and emphysema contributing. His grave marker is nothing fancy. His name is inscribed, followed by R.I.P. And the title for this is Dylan Thomas Spoke No Welsh. And the last one is very short. They fled the fire that had already consumed 280,000 acres with 2 parrots, a 60-year-old tortoise, and 3 dogs, Bunny, Frank, and King. And the title here is Atheists Ought Not to Be Offering Consolation Either. And that's from Christopher Hitchens. So thank you very, very much for hearing these.
Hi.
Hello.
That was wonderful.
Oh, thank you. I remember this place. Here, what year was it that Susan Sontag and William Gass sat in chairs much like these and had a conversation?
It was before maybe before my time here.
It was a huge moment for me. Can you imagine Susan Sontag and William Gass just chatting away?
Well, this is the kind of a huge moment for me. I think if I went back to 1995 when I first started reading you and said to myself, like, you're going to be sitting in this place with Joy Williams, I would have exploded, and I might still explode here. So, but I'm really thrilled to be here, and I also I want to thank you so much for joining us, and really just for the relationship you've had with our program and with WashU, and it's just a thrill to have your papers on this campus for everyone to be able to have access to.
Well, as I say, I'm getting more and more nervous about this.
Joel is an excellent steward of your papers, I can promise you that. So I just also want to thank the fiction faculty for their help bringing you here and getting the papers. Danielle Dutton, Catherine Davis, and Marshall Klimaszewski are really happy to see you. And I know that there are students of yours in the audience and colleagues of yours in the audience. So I want to allow them to ask some questions too. But I have a couple questions, and hopefully you'll be okay with them. So my first question isn't really my question, it's actually your question, and it's from Kristen on page 88 in Harrow. She asks Lola, do you think people write books to create havoc or for some other reason? Lola dismisses the question and says it's unanswerable, but I wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, I think more people should write books to create havoc. I think a lot of writers don't, but I think that's particularly now. I mean, I think we're entering a huge, and it really hasn't been hinted at much yet. But I mean, I think literature has to change and will change, and we're at a great moment of a wave of different ways of approaching the novel bearing down on us, and it's an exciting time. But we all have to rise to the occasion and create our meaningful havoc.
Is that so? I think about Harrow sort of brings us to the end of something, and if I think about your work, like looking back, it's sort of like you've covered humanity almost, and Harrow gets us to the end. Is your particular kind of havoc going to be leaving humanity behind, as it kind of seems like you're doing in these new pieces?
Well, you know this better than I do, but magazines sometimes have different titles for the online, and then what it's going to be in print is totally different. Yeah. And the New Yorker that had a big piece on me a few weeks ago, the online was Joy Williams Doesn't Write for Humanity, which I loved, but that wasn't the title of the print version, so I don't really have it. But yeah, I'm kind of sick of hearing about human relationships, but that still seems to be what's popular.
Well, we make a mess of things, so maybe it's time to move on. So speaking of articles that call you something, a recent Atlantic article about the release of the novel refers to you as our prophet of nothingness. But I sort of think of you as our prophet of everythingness, since, at least in my mind, you seem to have a knowledge of everything, or a way of reckoning with everything from the tiniest little birds and bugs to the big universal stuff, like climate change and bad television. And there's just, Harrow is a fairly slim novel, but it seemed, after I read it, I felt like I'd been through something, and there was so much information in it, and there was so much stuff in it, and so much reference to other things. And I just wonder about your process as you write. Like, does this come out as you're writing, or do you sort of keep a list of things that you want to use, and they wind up in your novels as the years go by, or in your stories as the years go by?
Well, that's interesting about the prophet of nothingness, because we've created nothingness. I mean, just in our lifetime, it's the absence of sounds, the great flocks of birds, the singing of the whales. We've created this, and I think, and thank you for what you're saying about Harrow, because I think it has a lot of what we had and didn't appreciate or didn't really realize was going away. It took me forever to write this book, and I really don't think of myself as a novelist. I really like the short story form, but I've written a couple of novels, and I have no idea how it happened. there's a quote of Houdini used to make an elephant disappear on stage, and one of the commentaries at the time was, even the elephant didn't know how it was done. And I've always kind of loved that, and I don't. I mean, after 20 years, look, I have this slim little book. But I do keep notes and thoughts all the time. I really can't tell you how that was built. I took out a lot of characters from this book. It really was much bigger. And most of it was in the middle part, where I was kind of describing the life stories of the people at the Institute. And so I took out maybe 100 pages or several lives that now no longer exist there.
So just to go back to the idea of like what we've like wreaked on this world, and and I see that so much coming out in Harrow. But I was going back and reading, like I read some stories of yours this last week, and also breaking and entering the novel, and found so many of the same kind of obsessions that turn up in Harrow, mostly about the kind of parasitic relationship that human beings, and especially Americans, have with their world and with the natural world. And even in a letter that is in the papers that you wrote to your daughter, and I just wrote down a little bit about, you're writing to your daughter about the real estate developers in Florida cutting down the big old trees and these lots that they own to replace them with new small trees, because the new Florida residents wanted things that were tasteful and fun, and big trees aren't tasteful and fun, but somehow small trees are. But I guess it's this like idea that we're doing this kind of damage. And I was just wondering, you were writing about these things really very early on, before I think almost the mainstream had turned its attention to like the damage that was being done. And yet here we are, and it feels like your work is remarkably prescient about all of that. And I wondered about, was there something in even your childhood where you started to recognize that there was a problem, that something was going on, and something that you kind of latched onto and felt that you had to write about?
Well, I was in Florida. I went to Florida in '68, and my daughter was born in 1970. And it was so different then. It really was. This was on the west coast of Florida, which hadn't really been discovered yet, and it was considered a little stuffy. And boy, in a few years, the place where we lived, Siesta Key, was just one condo, immense condo after another went up. And there were no fish to be caught in the, there used to be snook all over, and it was gone in my time there. And a few years, you'd go down to Key West and you'd pass through the Everglades, and you'd go through Fort Myers and all, and you would see birds, herons that looked to me insane. They had been driven insane. They were trying to fish in a little runoff where, huge excavating machines were maybe quiet for the moment, but another big estate was being planned. And I saw the wildlife of Florida being driven to extinction in madness. And I'm glad you mentioned that about Breaking and Entering, which was an early. When was that? When was that published? 80 or something?
I don't think it was quite that. I feel like it was maybe 89 or 90.
Well, that didn't take me 20 years to write.
It's actually a fun, I've been enjoying it because I hadn't read that one for a long time, but it's sort of a fun and funny book, even though it's got some of those overtones.
These have to be funny, don't they? Yeah.
It can help. Well, I think Harrow is funny, and even as you were reading it, I think I was noticing some things that were funny that maybe I didn't catch on the page as I was reading it.
Well, if you've got a 10-year-old who wants to be a judge and wants for his birthday a mock-up of a jury room, that he's got to persuade, even though no one's there, there are no jurors. I mean, you've got some leeway there to have some fun.
Yeah. So I also wanted to ask about, Joel mentioned, and I was talking about the relationship that you have that really goes back, several decades with WashU and with our program. And you were here, teaching, I think, when William Gass and Charles Newman were here, and I wondered just if you could talk a little bit about Stanley too, yeah. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about knowing them and your interactions with them, and just sort of.
They were wonderful. They were so funny and just real grown-ups. I mean, there aren't any grown-ups left for me. I'm the grown-up. It's a terrible situation. But then, yeah, it was exciting. And the program's always been one of the best in the country. And beautiful surround. Washington University has been a big part of my writing life.
Thanks. And also just wanted to talk a little bit about your teaching. I mean, like I said, there are students of yours in the audience right now, and I was a student of yours, and I can't sort of, like, every writer I wind up talking to, whether it's here or out in the world, brings you up. It's just something that winds up happening, and then I read interviews with people, and writers talk about your influence on them, and I feel like you also have, at least when I was in workshop, you had this great ability to, like, sort of locate a book that someone needs to be reading or a writer that somebody needs to know at that moment.
Yeah, that's nice. That can really be very positive and helpful when you're a young writer.
Yeah, but I wonder how, if you could talk a little bit about the teaching and how it does it come back to the writing for you? Does it come into your practice as a writer? Is it something where there's sort of a back and forth with that conversation with your teaching and your writing?
Well, you're probably better able to talk. How did I teach? I mean, was it? It was good. Was it chaos?
It was a long time ago for me too. No, it didn't feel like chaos. Yeah. I mean, I feel like you were sort of kind in the way that one wants a teacher to be kind, which is kind and honest. So I always felt like I came away from speaking to you about my work with a real knowledge that, like, okay, this is where I could go with it, and not feeling like I'd been deceived in any way or sort of like pushed into another's practice, as can happen sometimes. But it was also honest, and sometimes that was hard. So sometimes honesty can be hard, but I valued that at the time, and I'm glad for it now.
Well, I think it's important. I think sincerity is so, I mean, it seems that's such an old-fashioned word, but I think sincerity is so important in writing. And it shouldn't be on the page. I mean, it shouldn't be sentimental or anything, but it has to matter. I mean, otherwise, why is one doing it? You have to want to be doing something. Reaching something, understanding something, and be intent and sincere about it. And I also think, and I don't know how people are. I think in the early days of the workshop, I mean, teachers would they would actually think they had a theory about how to write a short story, and this is smothering. This is a terrible idea, It's just trying to find the voice or bring out the voice of the individual writer and treat them seriously, because they should treat themselves seriously.
So I do want to give members of the audience time to ask some questions. If anyone has a question, I guess, Joel, they should just come up to one of these microphones here, and I know that could be a sort of frightening march, but don't be shy. If you have a question, please come up and ask.
We could probably hear. You don't have to.
Yeah, maybe you don't have
to. Just shout out.
Joel wants us to use the mic, I think, so that the recording can catch it.
I would like to ask you what you think of this. I just read Carol Angier's huge biography of Sebald, W.G. Sebald. It just came out recently. And I guess you've all heard this. I don't know if you're all familiar with him, but he's a wonderful writer, The Rings of Saturn and Immigrants. But, and he taught for years, and apparently what he would teach his young students was to steal everything you can. Just listen ruthlessly and steal. And I remember, I was so shocked at that. And apparently, you read this biography and you realize he stole a lot from a lot of other writers and, and people's writings on the personal writings on the Holocaust and stuff. But I don't know. What do you think about that? Do you think that's good advice?
Well, I mean, I think I'm not gonna come back. I mean, I will say that that's a really relevant question right now because of the conversation in the literary world is about that Bad Art Friend article, which I don't know if you've heard about, but it involves one writer sort of stealing material from another writer, and there's a lot of stuff on Twitter about that. Yeah, and
they were all part of a little Grub Street collective or something in Boston. Is that at Grub Street?
Yes, it was something like that.
Wow, doesn't that sound like a nest of vipers,
it
right?
Was, but I mean,
I don't
know. I want to say that Picasso, or I always do say that Picasso once said, good artists borrow, great artists steal. It may not be true that that's what he said at all, but I've gone around saying it for years. So I'm going to stick to that, though, and say that some stealing might be okay, I guess.
Well, I think maybe if you absorb, great writers, whoever they are to you, if somehow you absorb their intensity, I mean, it's one thing, but to really kind of lift.
Yeah, that's probably not. Plagiarism is probably not good. Anyone out there have a question? There's someone. Come on up.
Okay, I'm kind of thinking of this question as I'm saying it, so bear with me. But I wanted to see if you could speak a little bit about something that I've read in your work that I read as kind of like illicitness imposing itself on kind of propriety, if that makes sense. I think that there's kind of a little bit of a wickedness in some of the scenes you create. You want you want the reader or the characters to kind of be shocked, whether it's by death kind of imposing itself into the scene or ghosts imposing themselves into the scene. I'm thinking of the visiting privilege or visitation privilege a little bit. But I'm wondering if that is kind of something you think about or are conscious of at all when you write.
I don't know. Thank you. I don't. You're sitting down. Wait. We've got to. It's okay. I don't think I want to shock the reader. I kind of want to wake up. And that sounds so pretentious. But I just want to illuminate something or flash something. But I don't want to shock them. I mean, I don't. Actually, I remember, and I think I've told this story too before, that Tom McGuane, you all know the writer Tom McGuane, and I met him in Key West once, and he said, "You're not as twisted as I thought you were." And here I am eating my sandwich or something. I wanted to be twisted, But I think people think that a lot of the early stories, or even maybe now, are twisted. And I mean, I'm not out to shock, maybe to create a little havoc, but more to just present something that I think we've forgotten in the fog of consumerism and these terrible days. But thanks for your question. I like that wickedness.
Anyone else have a question? Great. Danielle.
Having to walk There's probably a million questions out here. Hi. Oh my God. So I have two questions, and then you can answer both or just pick one, or you can just remain silent in the face of my questions. So one was, you said it took you forever to write the book, and I'm always really curious about when that happens to a writer, like when a book just kind of keeps on taking forever to write. And if you could
you take your mask? I think it's
Yes.
Okay.
I'm happy to. So I'm kind of curious, like, if you can just talk about practically what that meant. Like, would you occasionally come back to the book? Was it always was it something you were writing in the foreground, or was it kind of sometimes in the background, sometimes in the foreground? So I'm curious about that. And then what was my other question? Oh yeah, I was just reading an interview with the Belgian writer Jean-Philippe Toussaint, and someone asked him, the interviewer, how do you make your work funny? And his answer was work, work, work. And I thought that was a funny answer, but like I really want to ask people, that scene you read was so funny in the bowling alley. If you can articulate how you make something funny when you're writing. I don't know if that's possible to do, but I would love to know. Do you want me to stand?
What I think is funny. What I think is funny, what makes me laugh, is somebody falling down. I mean, that's the most primitive form of, right? That's me. Oh God, I think it's hilarious. How I make things funny. Well, life is very funny and disturbing. I don't know. I should be able to articulate what I've done for 50 years. I sometimes worry if I'm, well, I kind of know. I think I can answer this a little bit. But in The Quick and the Dead, there's a married couple. The woman has died in some stupid accident, running out of a seafood restaurant after 5 martinis or something, and slipping on some, grease or something. But she comes back to haunt. They're Carter and Ginger, and she appears to him, and she's dead. She's a ghost. And I could have some fun with that. And I realized at a point that I had to stop writing about them because I was enjoying it. In other words, they were in the way of, these were very attractive episodes to me and pretty hilarious. But I was aware of it, and so I had to stop doing it. And then another thing, this was in a short story, and it was it's the line, and I thought it was one of the funniest lines I'd ever written. It was about this guy had a friend who had a beaver in his house. He shared the house with a beaver. But the man said, when you broke bread with my friend, you broke bread with that beaver. And I thought, that's pretty good. Where it came from, it's just the alliteration, and when you're really working on something, exhausting yourself, it's just, sometimes these words come like that, and it's like a little glorious bubble. But as far as knowing how to do it, or, pacing a bit of humor or anything every 4 pages, I don't do that. I wouldn't know how that was done. I hope I answered that somewhat. Okay.
I just want to say that I think the funniest line for me in one of your stories is in the story Rot. There's, I don't remember the protagonist's name, but her husband brings home an old Thunderbird that he finds in a parking lot, and somebody has died in it, and so he obtains it based on the fact that somebody has died, and he brings it home and he says, "This car is cherry," and the female protagonist says, "Somebody died in this car. This car is about as uncherry as a car can get," which I really love.
Yeah, I've always wanted to. I had an old Jaguar once, 1960 XK150. And I still fantasize, dream about having just driven that car into my house and just have it there, having it there still.
You like
I think
I mean, I feel like in your writing, like you love cars. Like
I do.
cars
Yeah.
kind of.
I know, which is so bad now, right? I mean, you can't love cars. Oh my God. I know.
Anyone else out there with a question? Yes.
I came across an article that you wrote early in your career, even before you were writing fiction, I think, where you co-wrote it with a naval officer when you were doing some research for the Navy about shark attacks.
Yes, yeah. That was on NCS the Key,
And
too.
in this article, you were exploring the idea of shark attacks may not be motivated by hunger, that there was some other reason, perhaps, why sharks were coming after human beings. And it seems to me like this idea of the relationship of animals to humans became really important even in your fiction writing, that there is some kind of perhaps connection or communication that might be available here, that if we are open to it. I just wonder if you would comment on that in some way. But it just seems that that at least most of your novels, there is the role of animals are central, and almost that you one could maybe make a bestiary of this animal is here and this is what it represents and what it means in terms of thematic things, and, the implications for the people that interact with it.
Do you find that people are writing about using animals, or writing about animals in their novels? I mean, recent novels? It seems as though the natural world is really being removed from a great deal of popular fiction. I mean, an exception of like Richard Powers or Flanagan or something, but I don't know. I just feel we're learning more and more and more about animals, and they're going extinct. I mean, we'll have learned so much about them when they're no longer a part of our lives, you know? And where will we be then? Who wrote The Age of Loneliness? Is that what we're living in now? The Age of Loneliness? Who said that? Come on, Dave.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's well. All right, thank you. It's just, I thought it was really interesting. Like in the the Changeling, you have it's the whole there's a whole a theme that almost comes from Ovid, the connections where human beings seem to change into animals, and there are all these other connections that seem to be going on.
I could never write. That's an amazing thing too about writing when you've been writing for many years. I mean, you can't conceive of writing that book, again. I mean, it's kind of. I guess that's why lots of people just like to write novel after novel after novel, because they're chasing their own tail and realize that they couldn't do it. But to me, I could never write that book now. I mean, to me, it was so
Okay. Thank you.
obvious. Thank you.
How are we for time, Joel? Do we have time for one more question?
Got about 3 minutes, so maybe one more question. Anyone? Going once, going twice?
Thank you so much for coming here. And really, that was a road test. I've never read from Harrow before, so thank you for doing it.